Okay, so we will start with this seminar. Thank you for coming another Friday. Today it's Sofia Bolumar will be talking. She's a PhD student at the Animal Demography Unit, working with birds. She has started the PhD this year, so she will be talking about her research on storm-petrels. So thank you very much, Sofia. The floor is yours.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming and thanks for presenting me. I'm really happy to be able to do this talk this morning because it's more or less a year that I'm working here in Medea, but most of you do not know me well. And some of you have told me that I'm a little bit shy or elusive and cryptic. So you know, they say we are what we eat, but I believe that we researchers are what we work with or we study. So today I'm presenting tracking sea ghosts. And here in Medea, we study ocean from different perspectives. I don't know if you are aware that our seas are inhabited by ghosts. Let me show a video. So now you don't see nothing, and suddenly a ghost appears. So these mysterious creatures, they seem to be walking on water. They have a strange flight. And I don't know if you ever saw one of them. I will not be surprised if not, because it's really difficult to see them. And most people think they are bats, but they are not, of course, they are birds. They are European Storm-petrels, Hydrobates pelagicus. But why they earn this curious nickname, sea ghost? First of all, because they are really small. They weigh less than 30 grams. They are the size of a swallow, to give you an idea. They are elusive birds because they breed on remote islands and they nest in caves and in burrows. And they are nocturnal birds. So they arrive at colonies after sunset. Their peak of activity is during the darkness, and they leave colony before dawn. So it's really difficult to see them, as you can imagine. And these three elements also makes the perfect recipe for a challenging fieldwork. We often have to work in remote islands of difficult access. We spend a lot of time in uncomfortable positions, and sometimes we also work by night. But the real challenge is another one. The real aim of our study is, first of all, to characterize their complex foraging trips with seabird undertakes, and to identify the oceanographic drivers that guide their foraging choices. Moreover, we want to predict and map suitable foraging areas, and we need to quantify how well the current marine protected areas are covering their dining spots. But before diving into my research, let me spend a few words about their cycle of life. They migrate, as all birds more or less. They do it in August and September. They leave the Mediterranean and they spend their winter in North Atlantic. The wintering areas ranges from South Iceland to Canary Island, but there is a lot of individual variability, so both in time and in location. Then they come back to breeding colonies, and I don't know why it's like that. It's from back. Yes. Anyway, and more or less in March, and they are ready for love season. The breeding areas are around the Mediterranean. The biggest one are in Filfa Island in Malta, in Marittimo Island in Sicily, and the third biggest one is here in Balearic Island. It's Esparta Island in Ibiza. And what they do? Around the May, they lay one single egg. They are really asynchronous because in the same time, the same colony, you can find both adults that already laid their egg and adults that not. Then they incubate their eggs more or less for 40 days. After that time, fluffy ball come to life. And after more or less 2 months, they become juveniles. They resemble adults, and they are ready to fledge. So they leave the colonies, and they will spend all their time in open oceans for minimum 3 years up to 5 years when they reach sexual maturity, and they will be ready to come back to breeding colonies and start their first breeding season. So we talk about wintering areas, breeding areas, but what about foraging areas? These birds mainly feed on small fish or zooplankton. Their diet is not random. During incubation, they mainly feed on zooplankton to switch to fish larvae during chick rearing. Our study is centered on incubation period. During this study, we monitored different colonies, one in front of Benidorm City, which is Benidorm Island, one in the north of Ibiza, Espartar, one in Cabrera, Napora Island, and last one in the south of Menorca Island. We deployed 39 GPS on breeding adults, and we were able to study their foraging behavior because through our first passage time analysis, we identify ARS, area restricted search location, that are indicative of foraging behavior. And what we obtained. First off, cool plots. I know this slide might look a little bit chaotic at first glance because it includes all the tracking data of all the colonies and all the years they're together. However, it's important to start to see in general where they engage in active foraging. That is, these points that you can see in the tracks are the ARS locations. And the areas that are most exploited are the Alboran Sea, the North African coast, the Balearic Sea, and the Algerian Basin. Also notice how there are some birds that make stunning flights, one, for example, up to the Ebro River Delta, and another one up to the Gulf of Lion, more or less in the area of Cap d'Escrew. So we just zoom in the 4 top foraging regions for the species, but our tracks also revealed some impressive trip characteristics. These birds are able to travel remarkable distance. For example, they travel more than 1,700 kilometers in less than 4 days. So it's really a lot for such a small and tiny bird.
Without stopping?
No, of course they stop on water to feed, for example, or to rest. But in 3 days it means that they reach incredible speed. And so now we've just seen where they forage, but we want to understand why they choose these areas. So our methodology integrated high-resolution GPS tracking data with near real-time satellite oceanographic data to better understand this complex relationship between environment and foraging behavior. We selected a list of ocean predictors: sea surface temperature, chlorophyll, kinetic energy, bathymetry, and wind. Moreover, to add a level of spatial complexity, we calculated through a moving window function the ranges of sea surface temperature, chlorophyll, and kinetic energy in order to detect gradients in water masses that are indicative of fronts, of the presence of fronts that we all know that aggregate nutrients and thus attract foraging seabirds. To understand the complex relationship between these several oceanographic predictors and the foraging behavior of storm-petrels, we employed a generalized linear mixed model based on Benidorm data of 2019 and including the individual as a random effect. And what we obtained? Surprisingly, the wind did not have any measurable effect, but the most important variables were the sea surface temperature, the chlorophyll, the kinetic energy, and the bathymetry. This means that these birds prefer to forage in cold, nutrient-rich, highly energetic waters with shallow depths. Also notice that moving windows are significant. This means that these birds are sensitive to local spatial variation in oceanographic conditions. But we didn't stop at Benidorm. The robustness of our model was tested by cross-validating our data with the data of the other 3 colonies that we were monitoring. And the model proved to be highly effective, confirming that the selected predictors are consistent across population and time periods. Using the validated model, we were able to predict and map all the suitable areas for the foraging storm-petrels that you can see as the brighter areas in this map. And the results are basically, we identified as suitable areas, they're already identified foraging areas from our tracks that are the Gulf of Lion, the Alboran Sea, and the North African coast. Also, new areas are identified, like for example, the Ebro River Delta. I don't know if you remember from the previous plot that one bird engaged in that trip on up to the Ebro River Delta. And we also identified new areas. For example, I put these stars here because this area is exploited by birds from other colonies. This is a screenshot from the paper of our Italian colleagues that are monitoring this colony in the north of Sardinia. And they birds, during incubation period, are exploiting to forage the area that we predicted as suitable. So this is another proof of how robust is our work. In general, all these areas are regions of high biological productivity. So let's understand why these regions are so important. The Mediterranean is a complex and turbulent system characterized by a rich mosaic of 3D oceanographic structures. This video illustrates the mesmerizing dance of eddies across the sea. They are formed by the cold North Atlantic water entering through the Strait of Gibraltar and giving rise to multi-scale phenomena such as submesoscale and mesoscale features that enhance nutrient availability by bringing deeper and nutrient-rich waters to the surface. These processes are also enhanced by the seabed contours, which can further focus and intensify aquarium events. So these areas, these regions highlighted by the eddies and the seabed contours overlap with the areas that we identified as suitable. As we conclude, it is clear that European storm-petrels depend heavily on specific ocean conditions and specific foraging grounds. So these foraging grounds, as you can see from the map, despite their ecological relevance, are underprotected. You can see in the map the scheduled areas that represent the marine protected areas, our current network. And this situation is calling for a robust expansion, not only in size, but in the scope of protection, because we need to protect not only coastal areas, but to expand the protection to dynamic and pelagic areas. This is not only to protect, of course, storm-petrels, but also to ensure the life of other species that these environments sustain. And I would like to say that this work is already under review. It's the product of multidisciplinary collaboration between different groups of IMEDEA. And I hope this will be published soon. And thank you. Exactly.
Any questions for Sofia?
How do you differentiate when a bird is eating or is just resting on the water?
No, exactly. This is one of the problem. Thanks for the question because it's one of the limitations that this first passage time analysis have. We cannot really distinguish when a bird is resting or feeding. So the first passage time analysis individually areas of research, but are areas where the bird is basically not flying. So we cannot really distinguish between foraging and resting.
Also, this suitability map you showed, because as I understood that most of the variables that were defining where the birds were quite dynamic. So it's like sea surface temperature, like
Yes.
chlorophyll. So that
But-
suitability map, it's like a kind of overall map for the entire year, or it's specific, because I guess that all those variables they change along the
wait.
year.
No.
So maybe this map can change during the like seasonally.
Exactly. We concentrated on June.
Okay.
So we downloaded another time all the variables for specific years, and we made a mean of June. We interpolated the variables, and yes, of course, it can change. It could be possible to make projection for the future, for example.
And another good question is about all the MPAs you showed also in the map. Maybe because usually you can see this kind of maps, but do you know if really there is any measure in those areas that can affect the storm-petrels? Like, I mean, because does it mean that in this big area, a storm-petrel is more protected than outside? Because as far as I know, most of them, they are just like paper parks, and some only in very few places can.
Yes, this is these polygons do not show the level of protection, but of course this is the pelagic sanctuario, and this one is a corridor for cetacean, and of course the protection it's really different. For example, this one is in Alboran, and maybe there the restrictions are more severe, but yes, there are different levels of protection. This image only shows in general where our marine protected areas are, but no, I don't think they could be protected in the same way.
Yeah, because I don't know if in those sanctuaries there is any measure, like real measure, even for what they are done for.
Exactly, but when you discharge, when you download the map, they are there. So because if you do not show these two areas, it's really sad to see. Because there are really few protected areas. Do you have a question?
Do you know if they go to these particular areas because they sense changes in the conditions, or because they learn or remember that these spots are better for?
Yes, this is a good question because this behavior it's really particular. There are other seabirds that, for example, follow ships or fish to start, but they do not engage in such movements. They leave the colony and directly go to specific areas, and this is really curious. And probably, yes, they have a really developed olfactory sense. I don't know if there is any image of storm-petrel that you can see there. Wait. They are called tubenoses, actually, because, well, I don't know where the image is. Okay, for example, yes, they are like this big nose. So their olfactory senses are really developed, and probably they follow particular chemical substances called dimethyl fluoride, correct me if I'm dimethyl sulfide or DMT or what? DMS, something like that. And yes, and also their behavior. When I show you the video, you saw that they are like walking on water. And an hypothesis is that they probably are like moving the water and attracting more zooplankton in that way. Yes.
I'm sure that there are models out there that you can use to estimate the distribution of DMS.
Oh, good question.
So maybe that could be useful.
Okay, no, I don't have no idea. I haven't. Okay.
We tested if small petrels were attracted to DMS in the colony, because this has been proved to be important for other seabirds, especially Antarctic ones. And our experiment was that, that they were not selecting DMS, but we did the experiments inside of the colony, inside of a cave, and probably they found this odor as strange in the breeding colony. But because then when we see the tracks, they are going straight to the most productive areas, so probably they are using. But I have no idea if there are such information available to have a distribution of DMS.
Yeah, we still burden there.
But it is related with chlorophyll.
Yeah.
And with zooplankton, so everything is.
Very nice talk. I really enjoyed it, and very good to see that the collaboration between groups. And why do you study the petrel? What's the ecological importance of this in respect to other seabirds? So, why you focus on this specific?
Okay, so when I say that this is a mysterious species, it's not just a joke. They are really understudied for the reason I told before, because they breed on these remote islands. And for example, when I show you the image of the main breeding areas, the biggest one is Fish Island in Malta, but it's mostly inaccessible to us human. And they study birds with nests, so so they put nets outside the colony, and when the birds fly, they capture the bird. This study, it's different because we have a lot of data about on a populational trend level, because are more accessible. So as you see, so in the pictures, we are able to access the colony and have access to the individuals. So we mark them with rings, and we have data on their entire life. We have birds that have more than 30 years probably in our, so it's a really long time series. And it's not so common for this species. Also, because they are so small, it's difficult to track them. So these data are quite new, I would say, because the GPS that we put are really, really small, and they've been developed in these last few years. Before we had GLS, that are other types of devices. But for example, when I show you the image of the wintering areas, that study has been made with GLS, but the N here it's really low. They had just 8 individuals, and however, it's really huge. I mean, it's not so precise like a GPS. So there are a lot of constraints to study these species. And so it's really, and also it's really vulnerable, because as all seabirds, they are really vulnerable to invasive species and pollution, etc. So are really important to know where they go at it. I don't know if you have answered the question.
Question.
Okay.
Any other question?
I am curious about if the populations always remains in the same breeding areas, or is documented that they start like new colonies or something like this in last times?
Challenging question. I see my supervisor smiling. Well, I would say probably if there is a factor of disturbance, they can change their breeding colony. Otherwise, they are quite fitted. No, sorry. Fine. Answer, please. No, I would say I know that they like abandon the nest if they are disturbed. So probably they could change the colony or just switch to other nests.
Exactly.
Okay, so they remain always.
At least for the information we have in 30 years of monitoring several colonies, we have never detected a change of breeding colony, breeding area. Once you capture an animal like a breeder in one colony, it's never recaptured in another island. It means that we haven't detected. Maybe some animals do it. That is very difficult to detect. So tiny birds that are understudied in most of their breeding areas. They are extremely faithful to the nest. So if nothing happens, the typical thing is that they come back to the same nest. That a nest is the soil, but exactly the same position every year. If sometimes something happens, like they lost the egg or the chick or divorce or it's strange, but it happens. So they can move to a new nest. But typically, it's a neighbor nest. Less than 1 meter. But then juveniles, they perfect living colonies. So they move, they are able to decide where to breed. And for example, here in Cabrera, we have detected that in areas that were rat infested and the species was not present, once eradication programs has been done and there is no longer rats, they have colonized it. But there are colonies all around. We don't know where the animals that colonized this island were belong to, but probably from the neighbor colony. But it happens here in both in Malgrats, but now are dying because of snakes, and in some islets from Cabrera. Once they become rats become eradicated, we have found some Storm-petrels breeding in few numbers. But it means that at least young are able to colonize the sites to move around islands.
Okay, so we can finish here. Thank you very much.